Here's something I want you to try for just 3 days. Now, it's not as difficult as you think. I'm Justin Hitt from Inside Strategic Relations. For 3 days, I want you to shut down the internet. I want you to block the internet and all available news sources. So simply activate a filter on your router, or just block all the internet sites and social media sites for just 3 days. That's all you've got to do. It could be a long weekend or something. Don't pick up a newspaper. Don't pick up anything. Just block all news, radio, everything, commercial radio, everything. And this will be a great time for you to sit down and maybe listen to some classical music or your favorite type of music, just to kind of zone out and maybe read a book. But simply 3 days without any kind of social media, any kind of news media, no commentary, no talking heads for 3 days. Now, what you're going to notice is something amazing happens. First off, your levels of anxiety are going to go down. Now, I don't want to spoil it for you because it's a great feeling. There's a little bit of withdrawal up front, but if you set these noises aside, if someone tries to talk politics with you, you say, "Look, I'm not doing politics for 3 days. I'm not doing the news for 3 days. I'm just relaxing. I'm going to spend some time with family. I'm going to eat some good food. I'm going to chill out." Just do it for 3 days. But what happens is the anxiety is reduced. What happens is your mind clears up a bit. Now, if you can go more than 3 days, that's all the better. But what you'll notice is that little voice in the back of your head about how screwed up things are and how strange things are and how difficult people are and how this group's doing that and that group's doing this, all that will just fade away. Then when you come back to media and you start listening to it, you'll start noticing things. Like all the media is biased. Even the media that says other media is biased is also biased. You'll start noticing false logic. That's where people are making points or they're being interviewed and they're saying, well, this is the case of this because of that. And the logic just doesn't make any sense. In fact, when you come back to the media, you'll start noticing that a lot of the conversations are the same damn conversations as before from a different angle or the same angle or something more ridiculous. And it just starts wearing on you. And you had this period of peace, and now you have this period of confusion, and then you have to decide, which did you like more? Well, you can cut out all the news. Now, you want to know a little bit about weather so you can plan your week in advance. You want to know a lot about the news in your industry, and you want to know about the high-level political activities. However, if you're in it day in and day out, if you're in the drama of social media day in and day out, you'll miss the point that politicians are reissuing facts, positions, talking points from hundreds of years ago. Now, where did I get there? Well, while you have this time away from media, you're going to notice that there's this peace and this freedom, this relaxation. Again, there's a little anxiety up front, but after a day or two, you'll start feeling more relaxed. And you might start reading books like biographies, for example. And you're reading a biography from 100 years ago, and maybe you're reading a biography with Abraham Lincoln. And you're looking at the political issues that Abraham Lincoln addressed. And you'll start noticing parallels. Maybe you're reading a book like 1984, and you start noticing some parallels. Maybe you're reading an historic drama, and you start noticing some parallels. See, it's the same topics over and over and over again in the news, in the politics, taxes. Everyone needs to pay their fair share. Taxes, the rights of individuals. And what's happening here, and this is the strategic relations lesson, what is happening here is you're starting to recognize these patterns in communications that are used by politicians to maintain control over a populace. A population that is overwhelmed with all the issues, the problems, the important issues. Now remember, it's the politicians and the news people who are telling you which issues are important. In your day-to-day life, you might not have any race relation issues. In fact, your neighbors can be as diverse as you can ever imagine. Your friends and social circles may or may not be diverse because of the way humans interact with each other. Your financial situation may be wonderful. It may be bad. It just is. But the distractions of the world around you pull you away from being able to handle the perspective and improve your situation because the same issues are coming up over and over and over, the widening income gap. What does that really mean? Some people make a lot of money. Some people make very, very little money. Well, it's always been like that. But when it comes down to your family, it only matters how much you're making. It isn't someone else's fault that they make more or they make less. See, these points, when observed through the clarity of the limited distraction. See, the books are distracting. I'm not telling you to meditate for 3 days. I'm just saying step away. Step away from the rhetoric. Step away from the news media. Step away from the constant vying for your attention. Step away from social media and other people's drama. Focus inwardly on your family and your situation, or just take a break, or do nothing, or go to bed early for 3 days. Do whatever you want. But as you've separated yourself from this drama and this circus, you'll start gaining some clarity. Now, 3 days isn't enough to transform your life. I agree. But it's a start. So we're stepping away from this. We're reducing the anxiety. We're reducing the fear. We're gaining some clarity. I can guarantee to you, you're not going to have any mass confusion. Nothing horrible is going to happen if you step away from the news. In fact, when you're away from the news, if something horrible does happen, I can guarantee you that when you come back after 3 days, they'll still be talking about it. It's not like Trump's got to sneak out and do something if you're not paying attention. But what this is a cycle where the media source is building an interdependency between your everyday thoughts and their everyday broadcasts. So they are reprogramming your mind. And you can do this with marketing, you can do this with other things, but the news media does it very well. They're reprogramming your mind with the next disaster, the next fear, the next worry, so that you do one of two things. One, you say, good for them. Not good for them as in, their situation's improved, but good for them, better not me. See, somebody's being praised because if they took action and they stood up for themselves, good for them. They stood up for themselves. And the situation where there's disaster, well, you know what? I'm sorry for them. It's a vying and playing of emotions. But in all cases, you get the opportunity to see how you stand in comparison to other people in an emotional context. And what happens is you build up an emotional and chemical dependency to these materials. So if you ever opened up Facebook and saw a friend do a post of their amazing vacation, and you just for a moment thought to yourself, wouldn't it be nice to go on a vacation? Or you might have thought for yourself, those schmucks going on another vacation. Or you might have thought for yourself, well, those types of people. See, these are emotional triggers that directly relate to a comparison between yourself and another individual. News does it. Politicians do it. Politicians are really good at the in-group, out-group type of psychological manipulation. We as the Democrats believe X, Y, and Z, and those Republicans believe something else, and that's why we're taking this action. They play with the idea of impeaching Donald Trump. Unfortunately, our last three presidents have had somebody playing with the idea of impeaching. I guess that's one of their new tools in a toolbox. But ultimately, this isn't anything new. There's talks about impeaching Nixon, and they finally impeached Nixon. There were talks about impeaching Clinton, and finally impeached Clinton, and then unimpeached him. There's historical references of every little nuance that's being put on. The grandstanding, the news announcements, the vilification of one party versus another, the twisting and manipulation of facts, and the highlighting of bias and story. When you step away from these things, you give your brain an opportunity to cycle a little bit and better recognize these elements. When you can recognize bias in media, when you can recognize news sources that aren't very factual, when you can recognize facts that are being overlooked or conveyed in a way that discount the viability of those facts, you very often can start making decisions of your own. Now, I would hope you'd read a book like Systems Thinking by Peter Senge, The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, that talks about systems. And then you can start connecting that there are these systems of indoctrination that are being used on a public basis. Now, these aren't necessarily bad. They aren't necessarily good. But if you recognize this this saturation of media, this constant in-your-face monitoring and manipulation, and the internet, for example, showing you exactly what you're interested in seeing all the time and putting you in this isolation bubble, you can recognize that time away is one of the most powerful ways to get clarity, to reduce stress, and to build up that sight, removing the veil of displacement, of just that blindness that many leaders require you to have in order to maintain their leadership. There's some stupid stuff going on all sides. You won't recognize it if you're in the weeds with them in the battles. You've got to be able to step back and observe the situation. Now, once you do this 3 days, I challenge you to do it for 5 days, 6 days. You can buy a subscription to an executive briefing that gives you key news. You can use Google Alerts. You can go get the news that you need to know and have it delivered to you today with technology. You don't have to be there for the 6 o'clock news. You don't have to be there for the news feeds. You don't have to see it every time you open up your computer. In fact, you can set your homepage to a blank page, and when you open up your computer, you do the work you need to do, and then you get off the computer. So I would challenge you that after you try it for 3 days, try it for 30 days. I know that seems like a big leap, but if you have other activities to do, going out in nature, spending time with your family, sleep an extra hour a day, take a walk, maybe go to the gym, listen to your favorite music, watch a movie with your family. You could fill that gap with some deliberate time invested in your mind, invested in your peace, and you will start creating for yourself a separation between what really is chaos in the media. It's chaos by design, and your desires. So you'll start moving towards your desires and away from the distractions and the chaos. It's an incredible step. I know if you do it for 3 days, you'll be writing in with your amazement and when you came back, how everything seems so weird and different. And if you do it for 15 days and how you come back and everything's so weird and different, and you start forming new and better habits. And then after 30 days, you start maybe using the executive briefings to get your news once a week, and then you can action on the news, and you can get, have somebody help you with your planning so that you don't have to know what the weather is. Somebody else will look at it and help you with your plan. You'll start taking more control of your life. You'll start getting more control of your life. You'll start growing, and you'll start understanding that this chaos is a control mechanism. And it sounds like conspiracy, but if you've read a book like The True Believer, Eric Hoffer, I think, is the author of that book. There's a number of books. If you read 1984, they talk about that news cycle, that constant churning of the same message over and over. The pattern, the underlying news story is the same pattern, but they've changed the characters in it. If you look at some of the political influence books, you'll notice that this kind of relationship between the mass broadcast and the voter is a relationship designed for the mass broadcast and communications to drive a certain outcome at the polls. Now, I'll leave you with one last thing. Newspapers right now are being accused of having a massive liberal bias. Those same newspapers are now going in Congress and saying that the internet companies have unfairly cut their revenue sources. And we know for a fact that revenue for newspapers is down significantly. What do you believe might be another source of income for newspapers? In fact, I won't leave you hanging. It's been a traditionally strong resource for newspapers, and that's advertising revenue. With newspapers having to cut staff, they need content and advertising revenue to stay afloat. What's the best way to get that? Well, especially around election time, it's to get it from politicians. So what if this liberal bias is nothing more than a newspaper's way of feeding content to a populace and generating ad revenue so that they can keep their papers open? See, you'll start recognizing concepts like that. And now media, like on the internet, they give people a little more choice that tends to isolate individuals in bubbles of activity. If we can disrupt that, and this is what the newspaper's thinking, if we can disrupt that, then we can gain even further control. So what did they ask for? Well, they asked that the monopoly laws not apply to the newspapers so that smaller newspapers can work together to then get their content in front of customers. Now, this is something, if you think about, is kind of messed up, because right now that same law prevents the large media sources. There's only 4 or 5 major media sources. It keeps those major media sources from buying the small independent newspapers. The independent newspapers are struggling. They'll fail and they'll get bought out anyway. But the underlying thing is now they don't have to buy out the newspapers. They can start delivering content through the newspapers, through ad channels, through ad revenues, through syndicated content, and now reach a larger population of individuals using a channel that was otherwise failing on its own. Now, there's a lot of factors involved there, but ultimately what you'll see when you step away from the media for a little while is you'll start noticing it's the same story that goes around with no fact checking. It's the same perspective presented in 2 or 3 publications. It's the same contributing editors and freelance writers and researchers feeding these channels, and very often the news looks just like the political press releases. And it's like this on both sides, by the way, both sides and the other media that's out there for independent candidates. It works the same way because it is a means of communications that generally produces compliance in a population. It's propaganda that drives votes at the polls. People take action based on fears. Fear increases anxiety. Fear makes you do things, worry about things, and take a position. Just 3 days, folks. Give it a try. Just 3 days. That's my challenge to you. No social media, because social media is an ad channel. It's a news media source. No news media, big or small, local or national. I'd even cut the internet out. Spend some time with your family. Sleep an extra hour a day. Read a good book, listen to some great music, and then when you come back with that fresh mind, notice what's there. It'll be just like stepping into the Matrix and seeing that the world around you is somewhat structured and fabricated. Now, that can be good when you're passing along important things. However, it can be bad as well, depending on what position you're in. The underlying perspective here is that you'll be able to make a decision rather than other people making a decision for you. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, where we study and we talk about persuasion and influence and how you can gain more control and personal freedoms with your own mind through critical thinking. I'm Justin Hitt. You can visit us at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. Thanks for listening.